Back to the big breaking news from overnight. U.S. military launching dozens of missile airstrikes against Syria for the country's reported use of deadly chemical weapons against its own people.
And this is new video you're looking at here from Syrian state-controlled TV. It's coming to us within just the last hour. It shows what they say is that area near the air base that was hit by those missiles.
This is our first look at the aftermath of those airstrikes. Russian military says 6 Syrian fighter jets were destroyed in the attack. Russia is a close ally of Syria and is also condemning the U.S. airstrike. Russia's military, in fact, within the past hour now says it will help Syria strengthen its own air defense.
Leaders of other nations like Germany and France saying that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad brought all of this upon himself, and the president as well, speaking late last night.
Tonight I call on all civilized nations to join us in seeking to end the slaughter and bloodshed in Syria.
President calling for other world leaders to help end terrorism of all types.
It is in this vital national security interest of the United States to prevent and deter the spread and use of deadly chemical weapons.
The airstrikes happened around 3:40 local time at a Syrian government air base there. 59 of these Tomahawk missiles were launched by the U.S. military. This morning, there are casualties being reported as a result of the strike. Right now, 7 people confirmed dead. At least 9 others were wounded.
And we have Team 7 coverage of the breaking news. Let's begin with 7's Dan Housley, and he's live in Washington. Dan.
Well, Crystal, the Russian military also saying that the mission may not have been as successful as the U.S. may have liked. Of course, the Russians critical of the mission in the first place, but they are saying that only 23 of the 59 Tomahawk missiles reached the Syrian air base. They are saying that though the aircraft were hit, a half a dozen of them, as you reported, they're saying that the runway remains intact. This mission was a secret until late last night when it was the missiles were in the air, but there was some indications of what was coming in some cryptic comments from the Secretary of State.
So will you and President Trump organize an international coalition to remove Assad?
Those steps are underway.
What started as a vague comment early Thursday quickly became clear after President Trump announced a series of airstrikes on Syria. The military action comes just days after a chemical weapons attack that killed dozens of civilians.
Using a deadly nerve agent, Assad choked out the lives of helpless men, women, and children. It was a slow and brutal death for so many.
After discussing options with his military and national security teams from his Mar-a-Lago resort, President Trump ordered the launch of 59 Tomahawk missiles from 2 Navy ships in the Mediterranean Sea, targeting the air base in the Homs province of western Syria, where U.S. officials believe Syrian President Bashar al-Assad initiated the use of deadly nerve gas that killed at least 100 people, including children, earlier this week.
It is in this vital national security interest of the United States to prevent and deter the spread and use of deadly chemical weapons.
The strike took place just after 3:30 in the morning local time in Syria, when there'd be minimal activity at the base. The strikes targeted aircraft, airstrips, hangars, control towers, and ammunition areas.
There can be no dispute that Syria used banned chemical weapons, violated its obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention, and ignored the urging of the UN Security Council.
The strike is the first direct military action that the U.S. has taken against the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad during the country's 6-year civil war. Overnight, the Kremlin reacted to the news, calling the airstrikes aggression against a sovereign state in violation of international law. Iran also condemning the missile launch.
We can say that the Australian government strongly supports the swift and just response of the United States. This was a calibrated, proportionate and targeted response. It sends a strong message to the Assad regime.
Syria's 6-year civil war has claimed the lives of at least 400,000, according to the UN estimate released a year ago. More than 5 million Syrians have fled the country, and more than 6 million more have been displaced internally. On Thursday, the U.S. military also released an image of a radar track of a Syrian airplane leaving the airfield and flying to the chemical strike area on Tuesday. Secretary of State Tillerson speaking with reporters at Mar-a-Lago after the president's address to the nation.
President Trump evaluated this first attack, these attacks that occurred on his watch, and reflected upon the prior responses or lack of responses. He came to the conclusion that we could not yet again turn away and turn a blind eye to what's happened.
The U.S. began launching airstrikes in Syria in September of 2014 under President Obama as part of its coalition campaign against ISIS, but has only targeted the terrorist group and not Syrian government forces. President Trump says the goal of the airstrikes was deterrence in an attempt to prevent the airbase from being used to launch additional attacks.
And we hope that as long as America stands for justice, then peace and harmony will, in the end, prevail.
U.S. allies speaking out in support of the airstrikes this morning. Great Britain, France, and Turkey, all part of a coalition that has been fighting against Bashar al-Assad for several years, all speaking out in support of the mission. Great Britain with unqualified support, France support as well, but talking about bringing in peace talks to follow up on this, and Turkey concerned about refugees streaming into its country and its border area, is calling on an international coalition to beef up and support safe zones in Syria. Today on Capitol Hill, the Senate will come into session with the intention of approving by the Republican side the nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. You can expect more talk about the U.S. airstrikes during the 2 hours of debate that is expected. More live on Capitol Hill, Dan Housley, 7 News Today in New England.
And Dan, let's talk about that a little bit more. Some there in Washington who have been critical of the president's policies in the past have actually applauded this mission, and others have some questions about strategy and what comes next.
Well, you're going to hear calls in Congress to hear more about the president's mission, while the Republicans are generally offering unqualified support. Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, John McCain. Democrats like those from the Massachusetts delegation, Elizabeth Warren and Seth Moulton, both saying what was done last night was very good, but at the same time they're wondering what happens from here. Elizabeth Warren saying if there's an expansion of the effort beyond this, that she would want to see Congress consulted. And Seth Moulton also asking for more information and looking for bipartisan support and engagement of Congress on any mission going forward.
Okay, 7's Dan Housley live in Washington for us this morning. Russia has backed the Syrian president for years now, and now we're hearing the Russian military is ramping up to help bolster Syria's air defenses.
These new developments coming out this morning from the Kremlin, calling that U.S. airstrike a violation of international law. 7's Matt Rascone is here with more on Russia's response. Matt.
Chris and Krista, President Vladimir Putin is denouncing the airstrike. The Russian Defense Ministry now saying it plans to bolster its air defense system in Syria following the attack. It's the first direct U.S. military action against the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad during the country's 6-year civil war, and Russia is not impressed. Overnight, the Kremlin reacted to the U.S. missile launch on Syria, calling the airstrikes aggression against sovereign state in violation of international law. And hours before the attack, the Russian ambassador cautioning Washington against unilateral action.
We have to think about negative consequences. And all responsibility, if military action occurred, will be on shoulders of those who initiated such doubtful and tragic enterprise.
What be the negative consequences? What do you know by that? What do you mean by that?
I know empirically from history. Look at Iraq. Look at Libya.
Russians may have been at the base at the time of the missile strike, but their role was not immediately known. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson confirming that the U.S. military contacted their Russian counterparts about the attack ahead of time, in accordance with established policies.
There is no doubt in our minds the Syrian regime under the leadership of President Bashar al-Assad are responsible for this attack. And I think further, it is very important that the Russian government consider carefully their continued support of the Assad regime.
On Thursday, President Trump ordered the launch of 59 Tomahawk missiles from 2 Navy ships in the Mediterranean Sea, targeting the air base in the Homs province of western Syria, where U.S. officials believe the Syrian president launched a chemical weapons attack that killed at least 100 people, including children, earlier this week. But Russia has argued that the death of civilians was from Syrian forces hitting a rebel chemical arsenal. And Russian officials say none of their servicemen were injured in the attack. Russia has backed the Assad regime since September 2015 after an official request by the Syrian government for military help against rebel and jihadist groups. And just into the newsroom right now, Syrian President Bashar Assad's office has also denounced the U.S. strike, describing it as reckless, irresponsible behavior. Back to you guys.
Okay, Matt, thank you. Overnight, more lawmakers weighing in from Washington on the president's decision. Let's go to 7's Carrie Corrado with more of their responses, including some local leaders here. Carrie.
Well, that's right. Good morning. Lawmakers had some mixed reactions to the airstrikes. Many say the action sends a strong message to the Syrian government, but Massachusetts lawmakers believe Congress should have been involved in that decision. Reaction pouring from U.S. lawmakers on the country's airstrikes in Syria. The aggressive military action drawing mixed reaction from Democrats and Republicans.
I think this is an important, decisive step that was taken. It is not a message. It is an actual degrading of the capability of the Syrian regime to carry out further chemical attacks against innocent civilians.
John McCain tweeted, "The president's strikes in Syria send important messages the U.S. won't stand by Assad, aided by Russia, slaughters innocent Syrians." Massachusetts State Representative Seth Moulton, an Iraq war veteran, condemned the airstrikes. In a statement, he said, "We cannot stand by in silence as dictators murder children with chemical weapons. But military action without clear goals and objectives gets us nowhere." We look forward to hearing the president present a plan for Syria to the American people, for Congress to agree on bipartisan action, and for America to partner with the world community to help bring this treacherous conflict to an end. Senator Elizabeth Warren also disagreed with the airstrikes, saying President Trump owes the American people an explanation of his strategy to bring an end to the violence in Syria. We should not escalate this conflict without clear goals and a plan to achieve them. Congressman Joe Kennedy agrees that the recent chemical attack in Syria deserves a reaction, but does not believe yesterday's airstrikes was the right one, saying, quote, "This country doesn't fight wars without giving the American people a say. Any strategy that ignores the refugees fleeing this unimaginable terror is a half step at best." And Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer endorsed the airstrikes, but like many others, believed that President Trump should have spoken to Congress beforehand. Live in the newsroom, Carrie Corrado, 7 News, Today, New England.
And President Donald Trump away from the White House while the U.S. military carried out those strikes in Syria.
The president in Florida for a summit with the president of China. Let's go to 7's Andrew Scheinthal. He continues our coverage live from Florida near the president's Mar-a-Lago resort.
Good morning from Florida. So President Trump right now at his Mar-a-Lago estate. He's meeting with the president of China, but all of this overshadowed now by this attack that has taken place late last night. The president holding a quick press conference with a number of officials, including Secretary Tillerson, H.R. McMaster, and Sean Spicer, all of them speaking, really informing people about what was taking place, the decisions then that led up to the attack that took place last night, really showing that Mar-a-Lago certainly is the winter White House. The president here nearly every other weekend and now making some very important decisions out of Florida. In the meantime, all this taking place while the president of China is here in Florida visiting with President Trump. Now, he's actually supposed to be talking about North Korea and trade deals, but now all of that overshadowed by this attack with Syria. In the meantime, we do expect the president to continue to work on this event taking place in Syria, and we do expect more out of Mar-a-Lago today and hope to hear more from the president about this attack and if there could be anything else following up what took place last night. We are live in West Palm Beach. Andrew Scheinthal, Today in New England.
All right, Andrew, thank you. 7's Dan Housley is also going to continue his live reports from Washington on this breaking news in our next half hour and all throughout the day. Remember, you can also get the latest on this breaking story and many others anytime at WHDH.com and on your mobile or tablet device as well.